I just will maybe introduce Steve, and I'm not sure your title is director or head or manager of this. I got the old one here, Sandy. You told me its new name, and I've not got it, but
Civic Science Enterprise Center.
Okay, got it. That's what it is. And David is also with them, and you're also a professor at SFU.
I mean, I jumped up there, but no, I work in the Department of Biology.
Okay.
And my lab's at West Ham as well.
Right, and David's been working on kind of citizen science and looking at ways to engage the community and helping with some of the work that the center is doing. Anyway, so what I want to do now, or what we want to try and do, is discuss, talk about, ask questions, get answers, ideas about how we can support the Wild Salmon Policy Implementation Plan. The whole reason we had this seminar, and I don't know, what came up was so many plans, particularly even the Wild Salmon Implementation, Wild Salmon Policy, the Cohen Commission, et cetera, they get talked about a lot, but they don't actually seem to deliver anything at the end. They get lost in the I guess, covered in dust and sitting on a corner. And so we said, well, what can stream keepers and community groups do to make sure that we give the Wild Salmon Policy Implementation Plan every kind of support that we can, so that we can identify these conservation units, we can understand how to measure and monitor our salmon, we can target the areas that we want to enhance, we can actually do the enhancement and bring the salmon back. So what can we as a community and stream keepers do to make all that happen? And you heard from Minister Wilkinson, it looks like the federal government is trying to put some resources behind that. We've got more scientists, we've got Zoanne saying she's hearing the right things in meetings. So it's kind of like we have a window of opportunity and we just need to kind of keep sustaining that. So what I want to do here is for you just to share your thoughts, ask questions on what you've heard, and Jim will try and capture this stuff as quick as he can. We're not going to put it up on the screen. Jim and I have worked together for many years at events like this, trying to capture the ideas, and we'll consolidate them and we'll send them back to all the emails that we have. And then the idea is hopefully you'll be able to use them in some way in your local group or in your, at a cocktail party or whatever it is, that how we influence or manage change. So with that, I think, does anybody have a question for our panel or an observation or a suggestion?
I feel we're a lovely bunch of people in this room, and we're being really nice and polite. But there's an elephant in this room. I feel that the mandate here seems to be not the wild salmon policy, but aquaculture. If it was a wild salmon policy, we'd be worried about our orcas. We'd be stomping at the bit and saying, let's do something immediate to protect our wild salmon. We'd be worried about the virus that we should be actually testing for. And we'd be saying, what can we do immediately? What is our government doing? What is DFO doing to support that? And we as volunteers in this room would be right behind that, don't you think?
Yes.
What do you think, Popo?
Which one of the panel would like to take that question? I think I heard a couple of things. I heard frustration that we haven't moved fast enough and the stocks are declining, and why has it taken us this long to get going? And what are we doing to kind of accelerate it and to really get going? And I think we are at a transition at that. Who wants to take it?
Sure, is it on? Yeah, it is on. I'll start, but I have a feeling, Steve, others might want to add. We did hear that level of frustration and that need for call to action around when we were out on the road, when we were developing the document. And it's interesting because on the one hand, people didn't want us to revisit the policy because they didn't trust government in terms of what they've been seeing for the last decade, that we weren't going to water down the core principles and the objectives. On the other hand, they did want us to start taking more of a direct linkage to killer whales, to aquaculture. And so we have done that, or making those connections. I can't, I'm not sort of in a position, I didn't come prepared today to talk specifically. I'm happy to follow up. I know there is work happening around even the way we frame aquaculture now as the primary purpose around our management regimes and regulations now. It's shifted gears from just managing that fishery or managing that commercial operations to making sure we are mitigating and minimizing regulating the amount that they're doing impacts to wild salmon. I don't have the specifics and details. I'm happy to put you in touch with those folks. Similarly, there is a whole team of people working inside and more importantly outside on the southern resident killer whale and whales. My job and my team is about making the connections between those pieces, and that we are not going to be sustaining and supporting salmon populations unless we're also tracking these other issues. And we didn't do that so much in the past to see it as a holistic picture as we do now. But in terms of those specific issues, totally recognize that it's all interconnected. But I'm not here today to kind of defend what the department or others are doing on those specific files.
I was hoping there'd be an opportunity, and there might be a little later, to give you an introduction as to what is happening at the Science Enterprise Center. You know, we are, I'm sure you would consider that we're guilty of promoting aquaculture because we used to be called the Center for Aquaculture and Environmental Research. A lot of the research that's done at the lab is aquaculture related. And it is, this is the lab down in West Vancouver, by the way, the one just past Dunderave. And we have done work that supports aquaculture, but we've also done a lot of work on the regulation of aquaculture and trying to make aquaculture more suitable for the environment. But if I get a chance a little bit later to give you details on what's happening there, one of the details that I will play on is that we've just developed a relationship with Land and Food Systems out at UBC, where we're going to offer a certificate program. And they're going to, we hope, with some fairly expensive modifications, turn three of our very large tanks into a pilot land-based aquaculture system so that we can start exploring opportunities to move aquaculture onto the land. And that would mainly be salmon aquaculture. So it's not, I mean, I'm not here to defend how fast the government operates. And frankly, these days it feels like it's operating really quickly. The changes have come very fast. But we are moving towards trying to change the aquaculture footprint, and we have been for a long time. And so I don't feel the department is terribly guilty of some of the things that people have been accusing it of.
But why put more fish farms in?
I'd like to kind of move off the fish farms. We're here to talk about how we support the wild salmon policy. I think I encourage you to kind of link up with Sarah and Steve afterwards. I think there has been progress on reducing the footprint or reducing the number of fish farms and making sure that the Indigenous people have some input into where the permits are granted. I think there's more information there, but that's probably a whole workshop on its own.
Thanks. I just have one last thing to say on it, because there's actually, there's some talk about it on page 24, and it's great. And that's wonderful that you're working on the land-based, because it's sadly lacking, and there's a lot of worldwide examples of it happening, so I think we'd be kind of very ahead of that. The only thing that I want to say, just while we have this room of people and everything, is that there's been 2 court cases about PVR, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is supposed to change their policy. So I think we have a window of opportunity here if we don't say the same rhetoric as what Minister LeBlanc has said in the past. We have a North Vancouver MP now. I wanted to catch his ear, but I was waiting for the right time, and I just thought, well, I just got to get it out, so this is probably the best time. And so the fact is that they are supposed to test for PVR, because it's for long, there's still the science where one is saying that all fish have PVR, and it's not a problem. And then there's the other science that says, well, it's blowing up cells in Chinook salmon that we need for the orcas. So there's a thing called the precautionary principle that I'm sure all these stream keepers are well aware of. And the court cases basically said we need we're violating the precautionary principle by not testing. So now there's been 2 court cases, provincial court cases. I want to just go on record saying that the minister should not yet again appeal and start testing for PBR. Thank you.
I want to say thanks for those questions. They're, and the number of people that are here in the room, it demonstrates that people care about salmon, and that's how we're going to get not another appeal, or we're going to get land-based farming. So those are things that I think your presence here is accomplishing. But let's also keep thinking about ways we can specifically help Sarah, Zoanne, Steve, David in making sure that the priorities or the objectives of the Wild Salmon Policy Implementation Plan proceed. Jack?
Well, I just want to add to what's already been said. I too am fussed about the open net fish farms, and I want them changed to closed containment. It doesn't have to be land-based closed containment. There have been experiments, successful experiments, where you put a great big solid bale in the water and let it float there, and then it's closed containment, so that's fine. It's probably cheaper than land-based. So I want that to happen. Additionally, I want all forms of government, particularly federal and provincial, to offer incentives for these companies to change from ocean-based net, open net fish farms to closed containment.
That's a very good suggestion. Sometimes change does take incentives, so I think I had a question back here.
Thanks very much. So, being one of those people in the room, as many of us are, who are a bit old in the tooth and a lot grayer than we used to be when we started out working in salmon conservation, we had a decade worth of suppression of science in this country. It was a very dark time for those of us who have been fighting to make sure that decision-making is evidence-based. How do we ensure that, given the fact we are now 13 years on and now talking about moving forward, that come October of this year, that we don't end up going into another dark age because we have no idea what the political scene is going to be like in October. How can we build sort of resiliency into this strategy to make sure it doesn't become shelf art for another 10 years or 13 years?
Good question. In the stock market, they put poison pills so they can't get taken over. Who wants to take that one?
I can start, but I think Steve can actually talk about with his experience running one of the major science facilities out here and how things have evolved. I've heard him talk about it before. But I do have to say I agree, and I think, Glenn, you mentioned it earlier about seizing the opportunity in the moment, and it is unique in my experience with government where we have a minister from the West Coast really putting a focus on Pacific salmon, not just within here in Pacific or in BC, but on the national radar. We had our first formal response to Cohen Commission report that came out, and whether people think we've gone far enough, there's been some markers in terms of huge reinvestment in our science capacity, which I won't be naive. It could be undone, but it certainly we've gone quite far in the last couple of years compared to where we were before, and so you can talk about that. I do think that publishing a 5-year plan with accountabilities and commitments is now putting us on the hook in a way that I'll say was very uncomfortable for some of my colleagues for us to be doing that, and even at a political level, though there certainly was the will there. I've also seen now, and again, this could change. We were watching the provincial election in Nanaimo the other week. Right now, there's a strong interest, and it's from pressure from groups like yourself on the provincial government to take a real strong interest in salmon because of going back again to that image I had around accountabilities and governance. I totally appreciate the comments and the interest and the passion around potential about the impacts of open pen net aquaculture on salmon. But what about the habitat issues around salmon and development and agriculture, water flows and runoff? I think you all know and work around it to know there's a huge amount of areas where there's provincial jurisdiction that I think my only suggestion is that there is a window right now where you've got governments committing an interest in salmon is just we're quite excited by that and the momentum. We just want to make sure we lock in enough commitments now that can't be undone going forward. And I think things like this plan and the province is supposed to be coming out with a wild salmon strategy over the next few months are all good pieces that will send us in the right direction.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the opportunity to talk about what we're trying to do at the Enterprise Center. There was 10 years where things were pretty tough. As a civil servant, I'm not supposed to speak about politics, but it was a tough time to be trying to run a science lab. And that changed 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when the fisheries minister at the time decided that there should be 2 enterprise centers developed in Canada. One of them in Atlantic Canada at a Moncton facility, and the other one in West Vancouver, where Dave and I have our lab. And this, the concept is essentially a stool has 3 legs, and you need 3 legs to make it stable. And the first leg is basically traditional research that we've been doing at the lab for now 50 years, and developing collaboration with other like-minded groups. And so examples of that I mentioned with relationships with UBC, and we have on site the research wing of the Vancouver Aquarium. So you heard the minister talk about Peter Ross. He's based there, does microplastic work, and Lance Barrett Leonard. So we've developed a whale node as well, along with the OPP program. So that's the first leg. The second leg is development of community science with people such as yourselves, and it's apropos, this is the right time to tell you about this. My first efforts were to make contact with the West Van Streamkeepers and John Barker, and that, in the past we've been working with them, but we're trying to develop a stronger relationship, and one in which Dave, I hope, will speak about in just a minute, that would include many streamkeepers. So developing opportunities for community scientists, and the plug I want to make there is, it is a government lab, it does government research, but we want you as streamkeepers to feel as if it's your lab as well. If you need a lab, if you need an office, if you need access to departmental databases, there should be opportunities for us to work together, and I'd like to explore those. And the third leg is community outreach, and our big success there is with the West Vancouver School District and a pilot program to develop an academy for grade 11 and 12 students on the site every second afternoon. It's just a pilot. We want to build on that, and we want to build towards First Nations education as well to try to capture the interest of their youth. So it's that as well as happening. But for this audience, it's the second issue, this trying to develop a relationship with the community. Now, how does that answer your question? Our lab has been under the threat of being shut down many times, more than half the time. It's 50 years old. I would say 25 of those years we've been on life support until this recent government came in and came up with this Enterprise Center concept. During that time, when efforts were made to get out of the business of doing science in West Vancouver and reduce the number of facilities, it was friends from the community, in many cases, that kept us alive. It was the relationships that we were developing by not being a walled city, not being hiding behind a wall, but actually have people in the community that realized that there was worth in doing scientific research. So the poison pill, I guess, is to just open the place up for the community, including you people, bring you on board, and then I think we're going to have some longevity as a result of that, and can live through some tough times. Could Dave talk about the program?
You may recall when they tried to cancel the funding for the Salmon Enhancement Program, it was the community that maintained that funding. Here you go, Dave.
So I go now or wait? All right. To be honest, I think to answer your question, I think in order for us to be resilient against political change, we probably have to have more meetings like this where you get to understand what science is all about, we get to understand what you guys are interested in doing, and that's what this community project, monitoring project we have going right now is all about. It's like we have a science question we want to answer, we're going to tell you what it's about, and you guys, if you want to participate, great. You learn a bit more about the science culture, and we learn a bit more about what you guys are doing in terms of stream keepers. But really, to be resilient against political changes, you have to get to know your community itself. Those 10 years in the dark ages, we had our head in the sand most of the time, and it didn't pay off, right? So I think this is probably the best way to go. So.
Thanks. Here's one.
I just add 2 lines to that one. It's about having friends in high places and getting the right team in place. A lot of the reasoning behind being able to keep some of these things in our area is our MP, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones, as far as those last 2 examples were brought forward. And at the time when the labs, I mean, it's been 25 years, that's a long time to have an axe over your head. And they were able to come out the other side of it because there has been that concern and care from community. If community hadn't come forward, that axe would have fallen. The other one with the Salmon Enhancement Program and how that came about, that was actually this government that did that. So it survived the Conservative times, and it was the Liberal government that did that. So you can't just like blanket any one organization. It's about timing. And again, it's about having friends and about having good solid reasoning behind why to keep a program. There was a cut to it, but there was good solid reasoning to keep that program. I would like to comment though that while the program came back, the funds did not. So just keep that in mind as the money is rolling. We did not receive the funds back into the set budget to pay for those things. That's taken from low-hanging fruit, which in some cases is called science.
Thank you. Great exchange. Barbara, you had your hand up. I think you were next.
So as a stream keeper, people like to get involved in projects, and so we want to know what the most important project is on the stream, in the areas that we're working. So do you have a way of prioritizing or letting us know how we can make the most impact?
Excellent question.
Zoanne, you want to take that one? These guys are all dancing.
They're dancing, but I'll pass the baton in a moment. One of the things that's within the Wild Salmon Policy Implementation Plan is a lot about returning salmon populations, and that's somewhere that we can really sink our teeth into. Don't really, because they taste bad, but we can sink our hands into the flesh, and that's a piece that we can really pick up on and be able to give that solid information about what's happening on our stream banks. And it's real information because we are one-on-one hands-on with those fish, and that's knowledge that we can pass along. It's something that we've talked to the Pacific Science Enterprise Center, it's going to roll off my tongue one day, and about the idea of getting some of the data entered into the system so that they can be shared with others. And there's some large data sets that still aren't entered anywhere, and it'd be good to get those things done so we can partner with people like that to get things going. But from my read of this book, and it's not that easy to read. It's really easy to look at the graphs and look at the side, but it's really hard to read it. And but my piece from this is that it's going to be about looking for abundance and where those fish are.
I would just add, and again, it goes to the 2 big themes. One is around the assessment, the collecting of the data and the information. And Zoanne, and I'm trying to think of the other person from the Sea Hub group, but we were just meeting with folks like yourselves, but representatives from across the province, and looking for some guinea pigs and examples of folks who are willing to step up and again, I talked about earlier, articulate, work with our scientists to break down those barriers where data is getting collected but not for some reason used in being pulled together with the analysis and back and forth and supporting projects like Dave's talking about in terms of making sure that we are able to use data and test different and maybe it's reviewing the Streamkeeper manuals and making sure that it makes sense to people so that the assessment information you're collecting, and not just about the stocks but also about broader habitat indicators and ecosystem indicators, getting that information used and testing out different approaches. Zoanne mentioned intensive and what's the other one? non-intensive, extensive data monitoring systems. Anyway, there are science folks that are interested in exploring these different pieces. They don't have enough people on the ground or resources to do it. So finding people that are outside the department but wanting to test these different approaches, I'm fortunate to say I think your stocks here on the North Shore and even in the Lower Mainland, I know there are examples of ones that are in bad straits, but there are ones in other parts of the province where there's much less data being collected, much less people on the ground that could benefit by you guys testing out and trying out new approaches that we could then apply other parts of the province. So that would be one area. And then the other area I do want to just go back to is on the planning side. The most successful work I've seen whether it's in Port Alberni or whether it's in the Cowichan watershed or some of your places here, it's around these roundtables and community, bringing people together around planning. And Sandy was reminding me about with the Seymour slide. And government, sure, DFO was there at the table, but DFO did not lead that process by a long shot. It was folks like yourselves that were bringing together all the different parties that needed to come together to make that go forward. And so where there are stocks that you're concerned about, pulling people together, doing that strategic planning, and figuring out what are the priorities to bring those back, you're often better positioned to do that. And whether you've got the contact Rolodex list that Zoanne has in terms of bringing out MPs and regional district reps and MLAs, or just using your contacts within different levels of government, I just think both on the assessment, the data collection side, and also there's room on the pulling together and the planning side. Don't underestimate, I guess, your effectiveness at doing that sometimes far outweighs ours.
Your voices matter. I had a question over in this area.
Why, if you want any information about these streams now, do you have to try to figure out this enigma wrapped in a puzzle called NewSEDS, which you can't decipher? I don't care who the hell you are, you cannot decipher it. And even if you phone Joe Tatey, who looks after the data for DFO, he can't really help you either because they're not counting fish in most of the stream. And all of that information was so valuable. And it was available for anybody. Anybody could access it, could see it. They could open a page to Silver Creek or Stony Creek and they could say, oh, we have fewer coho this year than we had previously in any previous years. What's going on? And then they could focus right in that with DFO's habitat protection people and DFO officers in the field and local people who looked after streams. Why did that disappear? Why did that disappear? And why, if you want any information about these streams now, do you have to try to figure out this enigma wrapped in a puzzle called NewSEDS, which you can't decipher? I don't care who the hell you are, you cannot decipher it. And even if you phone Joe Tatey, who looks after the data for DFO, he can't really help you either because they're not counting fish in most of the streams. So if you're really serious about data and sharing that, making that transparent for people like stream keepers everywhere, why isn't it there? How long will it take you to get it back online?
Nice question, thank you.
I also hate NewSEDS. It's difficult, and even knowing the codes and the decoder ring itself to figure it out, it's still not easy to navigate. So I'll come back to the previous question though. You're asking what to monitor. I think you, based on Stream Keeper handbook and everything else, and especially the 6 items that Zoanne brought up, it's not a collection problem. You guys are collecting the right information. Is the second question here, which is it's really a dissemination problem. And the fact it's just crazy in today's age where things should be easier to get a hold of. We still go back to those old books now to look up from the old Frapp and Green days to actually see what was in these creeks in the past. So I don't have an answer to the question, but I do know the problem quite well. And so you have some sympathy anyway in terms of dealing with it. And I do think that DFOs aren't going to go back out there and collect fish in those cans and assessment information on those streams. I highly doubt it. So that's probably does fall to the people in this room here and elsewhere groups to do that kind of work, to be honest. We just have to figure a way to actually make it work within and still be defensible database, basically, right? Which is not stock assessment's my angle. My angle is really about the habitat indicator and temperature and stuff like that. But that's the exact same thing you want to do, is evaluate the efficacy of the work and how good is it and strengths and weaknesses. So.
I have a great privilege of being at province-wide tables where we are active in learning about what's going on. And one of the things I was surprised to hear about is there's a program called Fish Guardians that took over from some of the fisheries officers' work, and there are people who are hired to travel and go up and down the streams, more in the remote areas, it seems, than in the areas that we are. But Leandra, the fellow you're trying to remember his name, in Hatigwai is one of those people that's hired to go out and do those, but the process has changed from the fisheries officers.
They don't have, they don't have these people. Joe Tatey, who is the guy you're trying to think of, tells me that they haven't got enough people, they have the funds for the program, they didn't even count last year.
Yeah, so, and the idea that we need to count has kind of dropped off over time as well. It's become, indicator stocks have become like less and less. It's not supposed to be about money, but I read the science report about indicator stocks. I read it to see if I could understand it, and I went to the meetings and I found out, yeah, I got it. And it says it's not supposed to be about money, but I kept reading every time. There's budget here, budget there, and it was all about where they could afford to go and count in a stream system. And there was one that ended up being a hop across stream that people could count there because there was 2 people, retired fishermen, that lived there. But I want to say about the fisheries officers for 1 second. If we could just really make a concerted effort to say how important those people were and get them back on track, that would be amazing. A fisheries officer the other day said if you are driving down the street and you see a speed sign, you may or may not pay attention to it. Maybe that would be a good idea. If you see somebody with a community policing with the yellow vest and standing with the sign that blinks that says you're going too fast, some of us will slow down for that. But if you see an officer in uniform standing there, your foot goes on the brake regardless of whether you were traveling too fast or not. And that's what a fisheries officer is. When they show up in that uniform, you all of a sudden start paying attention and doing some good works. We're told, I didn't catch the numbers quite right, whether there's 3 new ones coming or 6 new ones coming, but there's money for fisheries officers through the new Fisheries Act. What I wasn't aware of is it's 5-year money. It's grant money to put these people in place. I was unaware of that. We would like to see long-term fisheries officers A-base funded so we know that they can survive to the next generation. We don't know whether they can. It takes 3 years to get a fish cop to be a fish cop, and that's a new fish cop just out of school. Okay? We're already a year into the program, so we're 4 years in. Who's going to take that job? It's a 1-year job. Who's going to take that job? So what we need, and we were told on this, is we need 24 new officers to get back to 2004 levels with fish cops. So if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, start writing. Don't email, don't do stuff. Write a letter, say we need more fisheries officers in British Columbia.
The link between the laws and enforcement is very strong. We're almost out, in fact we are out of time. I'm going to let you have the last question.
Thanks.
Well, this is a,
Maybe we'll squeeze Paul in.
I guess this might be a segue to your last comments, but my name's Nat. I'm the chair of the Orkson Watershed Enhancement Society. I've been a volunteer since 2000. And I'll tell you, we're the fish cops. That's the truth. So I have this DFO emergency line, and I call it occasionally, and I had to this last September. We had a 5-day industrial fire right on our creek. And the Township of Langley Fire Department worked it for 5 days. I showed up on the 4th day, and I said, okay, they were wrapping up. I asked the fire chief, okay, what's going on here? I see you guys are kind of at the wrap-up stage. And he says, well, number one, we protect life. Number 2, property. Number 3, the environment. And on the 5th day, I showed up and I said, well, like this creek is polluted everywhere, and it's a slick all the way down through First Nations into the Fraser River. What's the plan? And he said, okay, we've got the human life's taken care of, so now we switch to property and the environment. I said, so what's the plan for the environment? Well, we're gonna hand that over to the township. And so I call the township, and the township says, well, we thought the fire department was taking care of it. And in the meantime, I'm calling the DFO emergency line repeatedly, and I'm standing out there and it's crickets for like 5 days, 4 days. No response. So my question is, why do you have an emergency line like 911 if your house burns down and there's nothing that shows up? What's the plan? And why do you have this line? And last comment is there were 3 industrial fires on the Fraser River this year to do with AMAX. And what was the cleanup and the protocol for that?
I don't know if there's an answer for you, but
Where's the hazmat? Has anyone seen a hazmat team? I'm in construction.
As John states, I suspect if you're going to ask Paul.
Where's the hazmat team?
again, I think you're making a great point though. The point Zoanne was making.
I do holes for a living, and we are part of the system that occasionally has spills, or we see a spill, or we're next to a job before there's a spill. I've been doing this for 35 years. Show me a hazmat team.
Right, and the point I'm going to make is you're here, your comment will helpfully move us in the right direction.
Well, I hope so, because I mean, can you imagine, like, this is our precious resource that draws people from around the world to British Columbia to live here. Our land values are what they are because of this fish and this wildlife resource. But if you call 911, nobody shows up. Your house burns to the ground.
Right, thank you very much. So, Steve, what are you trying to say? I was going to let Paul, and I think Paul's going to have the same thing.
Paul will probably ask what you just.
So I'm going to sit over here, right? Because I am the DFO at the Yorkson Creek.
Yes.
So I'll answer your questions.
I haven't got this gentleman's name yet,
Paul,
but
you're going to make it short, and so
yeah, well, sweet. I know. Paul Burlingame, North Shore Wetland Partners. We have an oil spill on McKay Creek yesterday, and what this gentleman just told us is exactly what goes on every day, no matter what watershed. And there's a lot of finger pointing. We did see a hazmat team came out this morning from North Van City, but it's actually on district property, so they were chasing it. No one had communicated, and it's really a problem with communication. Even when you're in the same room, it seems things can go awry real easy. But for this, we phoned it in at 4 yesterday, and to see that they put one little boom out overnight, and you can go down and look at the creek today, and it's incredible how much oil is in there. I walked over to the North Shore News and said, "You guys interested?" And they went, oh no, we don't respond like that. But anyway, we live in developer-driven communities. We have no federal direction. It hasn't been going on for a long
The
time.
developers aren't the bad guy. I work for them too.
It doesn't matter. We have our rules here in our districts and how we work and stuff. This building alone was really an example of how things shouldn't have happened. But Paul here, who stood up from Squamish, and Pamela, Jack Cooley from Squamish, Pamela Zebit. These are incredible stewards who are among us, who have been helping us for many, many years. Our salmon program is the best through salmon enhancement for teaching us, but we don't have federal authorities anymore like zero net loss and compensation. Our fish cops are really neutered. They can't really come and do anything into our districts where they've downloaded this overall to them, but they're our biggest developer. So it's not working. We're not communicating amongst ourselves. These kind of disturbances within our creek are virtually daily. But we're out there suffering, trying to get things done. But it's really a broken connection here that goes up the ladder. And they're talking about more biologists than the science. And well, in the 25 years I've been doing this, all I've seen is less and less fish. There's been less and less fish all along, no matter what we're doing. We're not coordinating, we're losing them. And it's remarkable to see that we can't even deal with some storm drain issues collectively. My apologies, I gotta go now, but...
Thank you, Paul. Now, Mayor Little, you were elected on a platform that somewhat relates to what Paul was saying. Would you have an answer to, and Tony's beside you, how would you respond to the passion that you're hearing in the room?
I don't know if I can add much to the discussion on this. I mean, first of all, City of North Vancouver and District of North Vancouver fire departments use what's called Move Up Module, which is a joint dispatch system, which there shouldn't be any barrier issue between a city person responding and it crossing over into the District of North Vancouver. The City of North Vancouver's fire department is actually the lead on hazardous materials spill issues on the North Shore, but our fire hall number 5 also has hazardous material response capabilities as well. So I'd be surprised if it wasn't happening at all. It would be new to me. I'm relatively new to the job, but I'll gladly connect with Zoanne and find out what the response is like with the District of North Vancouver and the City of North Vancouver's fire assets and hazardous material assets. But I'm sorry, I don't know any more than that. So connect with Zoanne.
I just want to say thank you, Mayor Little, for being here and staying to the end and hearing this kind of stuff. That is so valuable. And Tony, the same for you. Really appreciate it. We're out of time. I want to call on Barbara to kind of wrap it up, give some gifts to our speakers, and we'll say goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm here representing North Shore Streamkeepers. I was asked to do a little summary. Do you still want me to summarize?
Real quick.
Real quick. What I heard, we have 3 themes in the wild salmon policy, which are developed in the implementation plan, and on assessment in particular. As streamkeepers, we can work on the core environmental indicators, particularly returning salmon and spawners and habitat. And that data sharing is a really important theme for us. It's hard to record data. And for you, it's hard to get our data. So we need to have that theme developed. It's then on the maintaining and rebuilding stocks, that was interesting that you feel that local knowledge is probably the best way to come up with projects, and that then you're there presumably to support us when we need to. So building roundtable discussions with stakeholders is a way to come up with those projects, which is great. We all enjoy working on projects. And then accountability, obviously we have to build a structure that can withstand changes in government. We have to have more fisheries officers in British Columbia, and then the DFO needs a hazmat team. That's what I got out of the discussion.
We need our own.
So we have, I'd like to say thank you very much for everybody who participated. Thank you very much in particular to our speakers. I have a special gift. I need somebody to hand out the presents.
You know where we live, right?
Yeah, special present for Sarah and Zoanne. Thank you very much for David and Steve for being on our panel today. And I have a whole list. Where's my list? Okay. My list of people to thank. Here somewhere. I forgot to bring my copy. Where is it? You lost it. That's not my copy. Oh, there we are. Okay, so thank you to Sandy Hollick Kenyon and Sean Hollingsworth at reception. Thank you to Keegan, Cassidy, and Janet Dysert for introducing speakers. Thank you to Fort Dolores for the cookies. And thank you very much to Jim for being the scribe, and we'll all look forward to the results of his scribing, and also to Glenn for facilitating. And a big thank you to Janet and Glenn for organizing this event, and to all of you for coming. Thank you very much.